What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? A lot of people either aren't familiar with or don't understand mythicism. So today I want to tell you 3 reasons why I'm a mythicist and think that Jesus probably didn't exist. In another video, I will cover the lack of extra biblical sources, but for today I wanted to cover a few things central to the mythicist argument that you may not know. If you're interested in learning more about the historicity of Jesus, then please stay tuned. First, I want to introduce you to Philo of Alexandria. He is a 1st century Jew that was writing before Jesus supposedly pimp-walked around Judea. He is important to the mythicist position because he is a prime example of a Jew that believed in a pre-existent celestial being named Jesus, who was the firstborn son of God, the celestial image of God, God's agent of creation, and God's celestial high priest. These are all things that describe Jesus in the New Testament. Literally. There is a Bible verse in the New Testament that matches each of these claims made by Philo. Philo was born around 10 to 20 BCE and died prior to 50 CE. Philo wrote a doctrine on the Logos of Judaism between 10 and 35 CE. This was a description of the very Savior that is central to Christianity. In On the Confusion of Tongues, number 63, Philo says, "For the Father of the universe has caused him to spring up as the eldest son, whom, in another passage, he calls the firstborn. And he who is thus born, imitating the ways of his father, has formed such and such species, looking to his archetypal patterns." In this passage, Philo identifies this eldest son as the firstborn, and who imitates the ways of his father, and identifies him as an agent of creation by saying that he forms such and such species. His idea of the Logos stems from his understanding of the Jewish theology surrounding this Messiah figure. This firstborn son idea is noted in Psalms 89:27. Several verses identify this Messiah as both God and man. The servant or agent of creation can actually be found in several verses, including Zechariah 3:8 and Zechariah 6:12 through 13, which actually labels him as both priest and king. Zechariah 6:11 through 12 even directly uses the name Jesus for the Messiah. Philo is a perfect example of a Jew who was looking to the scriptures for a Messiah figure. And the Jesus character that we ended up with is precisely the one described by Jewish theology, which leads me to my next point: scriptures. There's a list of 353 prophecies that supposedly prove that Jesus not only existed, but was predicted and is God himself. To many apologists, these prophecies are hands down proof that Jesus was real. What's interesting though is that none of the Gospels actually have Jesus fulfilling all of these prophecies. So I ask you, what's more probable? That a man God was born and fulfilled all these prophecies, like all 353 of them? Or that groups of people who ended up writing these Gospels had different ideas about which prophecies he fulfilled, writing in some and leaving out others? Considering the fact that all of these prophecies are fulfilled in various Gospels, and none of the Gospels confirm every single prophecy of Jesus, nor were they recorded at the supposed time that the prophecy was fulfilled, it seems far more likely that this Jesus figure was compiled from earlier Jewish texts. All that aside, magical prophecy is questionable to begin with. Any natural explanation is going to be far more probable than a supernatural one. We know that the early Christians were getting their information about the Messiah from the scriptures for a couple of different reasons. First, we have Paul, who stresses that he got his information from no man, but only from visions and the scriptures. Then we have the first gospel composed, which was Mark. He actually starts off his gospel by quoting a cobbled together prophecy supposedly from Isaiah. In actuality, it's multiple different passages from the Old Testament in general. These facts are proof that different Jewish Christian sects were using the scriptures in order to inform themselves about this Messiah figure. They were not actually getting their information from historical accounts. I would say that the likelihood of these Jewish Christians just making stuff up is far more probable than one guy existing. While this may seem like an easy refutation of the biblical version of Jesus, the fact that they were not recording history, but instead recording theology, is a really big blow to the historical account for Jesus. Finally, due to the fact that these Jewish Christians were writing theology and not history, we would expect to see this reflected in the Gospels, and we do. We see it all over the Gospels through allusions, parallels, mirrors, and other literary devices. So allusions connect current events being written about to the ideas and emotions of past events. An example of allusions in the Bible are the miracles that Jesus supposedly performed. These connect Jesus to the prophets of the Old Testament that perform similar miracles. Raising people from the dead is a common allusion in the Bible. Luke's account describing the raising of the son of the widow of Nain is a direct allusion to the raising of the son of the widow of Sarepta. These two stories are modeled exactly the same. Early Christians understood that from Isaiah 26:19, the Messiah was supposed to raise the dead. They saw these miracles of the Old Testament to be allusions of the Messiah. This is only one example of the multiple allusions that occur in the Bible. Parallels are also used to create allusions to figures in the Old Testament. Matthew's birth narrative is a mirror of and allusion to Moses. In Moses' story, Pharaoh goes to kill all of the young Jewish boys, just like Herod did in Matthew. And Moses was hidden from Pharaoh, just like Jesus was in Matthew, until he couldn't be hidden anymore and was sent away. Moses is picked up by Pharaoh's daughter, while Jesus, he and his family escaped Judea to Egypt. Moses ends up fleeing Egypt and later comes back as the Jewish people's savior. And the same thing happens with Jesus. This is definitely a parallel. And Jesus' story is alluding to Moses' story, because he was one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament. Matthew's author purposefully made this connection for theological purposes. Another example is Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, which is a parallel to God's sacrifice of his son, Jesus. God's sacrifice is greater though. Not because it actually happened in history, but because it had to be a bigger sacrifice, given that this sacrifice saved man. These are theological connections and not history. These examples are just a few of the many parallels in the Bible. So let's put this into perspective, shall we? If the New Testament is generated using the Old Testament, Paul only specifies scriptures and visions as his sources, and Philo of Alexandria lays out a template for this Messiah figure prior to these stories being circulated, then what real evidence do we have that cements Jesus in history? What is supposed to convince us that he wasn't just some made-up figure to complement the Old Testament? Outside sources? I think not. And we'll learn more about those in the next installment of this Mythicism series. Thank you, heathens, for joining in today. I would really love to read your comments down below. Please leave those. I will be interacting there. While you're down there, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of mythicism content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice, and I will see you heathens later.